to Enlightenment of Change on webtalkradio.com. I'm your host, Connie Whitman. My guest and I are excited that you're joining us this week. So change, right? Do I feel the sighs from everyone out there? Change can be really hard, especially if we don't choose the change. So to help you navigate whatever change you're going through, in the show notes, you'll find my communication style assessment. It's a little quiz you get to take, and you'll get 2 reports. First report spotlights your natural superpowers. It's just naturally how you communicate and how people are receiving your message. Important to know, right? Flip side, you'll get your blind spot or lowest score, which really spotlights the people who communicate 180 degrees opposite of you. Even more important to understand what your blind spots are so you can navigate that change with a little bit more ease and grace. Again, links in the show notes, my gift to you. So my quote for today is to set the stage for my guest, and my conversation is by Sarah Clayton. And Sarah says, few things are more important during a change event than communication from leaders who can paint a clear and confident, inspiring vision of the future. You know, when I saw the quote, I kind of giggled because I thought, well, you know, this show is all about creative, productive change. And again, I think it's for our personal as well as our professional lives, because there's clearly overlap in that realm. Now, at the core of any change, I do believe it's got to be about clear communication. So when change hits us, especially again, if we haven't chose that change, we forget to seek help and communicate with others to make the change easier for ourselves. So why do we do that? It doesn't have to be hard if we have a plan. So, of course, my guest is an expert on this topic. Her name is Amanda HarNess. Amanda owns Business Excelerated, and you'll see in the show notes it's with an EX, not accelerated with an ACC. So she is the owner of Business Excelerated and works with service-based organizations to resolve the problems keeping owners from achieving their business goals. Now, with focus on growth, strategy, people and leadership, and change navigation, her clients can close the gap between where they are now and where they want to be. She helps owners determine real goals, supports them to increase the speed of execution, and provides long-term solutions that stick. So important. Please help me welcome back for the second show, my good friend Amanda. So Amanda HarNess, welcome to the show, kiddo.
Hi, Connie. Thank you for having me again.
I always love having you. We always have a good time together. And your zone of genius, you know, you really are an expert in this change leadership, change navigation. I like that word because you literally are the GPS of change for your clients and organizations that you work with. So this is important because change throws us for a loop.
It does. Yeah, there's a lot of layers to change. It's complex. A lot of times we just make it complicated though, and it doesn't have to be. And I like the word navigation instead of change management, because like a GPS, when there's something that comes up in the road that we didn't foresee, we can get a clear view on how to maybe go around it or alter our plans and our direction. And management feels like the goal is to really just keep things from being bad, like you're trying to scoop them, you know, under the rug or keep them in a box, whereas navigation really just allows us to accept that change might cause some disruption and that we are just here to try and move through the ups and the downs and get to the other side as fast and easy as we can.
Yeah. And I like the word navigation, right? Because think about it. We rely now on our GPSs, whether you use Waze or, you know, Google Maps or Apple, whatever it is, because if there's construction, they're going to take us on a route. It was funny. I was traveling this week, Amanda, and as I was coming back, it was taking me one way. And right before I got off the exit, it changed. I was like, what the heck's going on? And in the sign overhead, you know, they have the electronic signs here in New Jersey. They do anyway. And it said exit 7A, where I was supposed to get off, crash. And I thought, wow, like literally I was a mile away. And I thought, why did it change? And then there was the notice on the messaging board on the road. That's navigation. Can't control it, can't expect it, but now we can shift gears if we have that roadmap, if you will, or the navigation in place. So I love that phraseology. To me, it's a visual, and I think it's that guidance that we all need that we just don't see. Just like I didn't know there
Yeah.
was a crash up ahead, that guidance is put in place to help me shift gears quickly. Do me a favor, Amanda, just provide an overview of the work you do in helping organizations, because it's a little bit bigger than me and you, the individual, right? So how
Yeah.
organizations and how you help them manage that change.
Yeah. So when I'm coming into an organization, usually they're moving through some kind of transformation. It's the change we're talking about. And that can look like a lot of things. It can really be leadership transitions. We could be post or pre M&A. Maybe they've grown in regard to a larger client base, or they've moved to new locations. Maybe there's big changes in their workforce. That's something that a lot of companies are going through now. We're at the end of the year, and there's sometimes restructuring that happens, whether that means layoffs in certain departments because we're shifting our focus from marketing to product development, things like that. So all of those things that we do that move us toward achieving our goals and getting the outcomes we want require change. And so really my role is to help organizations achieve the goals or get to the initiatives that they're focusing on and navigate through the changes that are required to get there. So my approach is really a leadership first approach. That's what I call it, is the concept that we have to really create a strong foundation at the top of the organization in the leadership teams. And that could be executive level, it could be the level underneath that, it could be specific department directors, leaders, managers. But those are the people that are gonna help all of the employees and staff underneath them to do the work needed to achieve the initiative, goal, outcome that we're looking for. So creating a strong foundation at the top, that change leadership, is really what I focus on so that we can, be able to move people through the change that we're looking for, give them guidance and support, provide them with the tools and the systems they need. And that has to come from the top. So the leadership first approach is all about top down, for the sake of the people toward the bottom. It's pardon my French, but poop rolls downhill. I'll not use the bad word. And so, especially during times of change, right? It's true. And so change causes disruption. It can be really hard for a lot of people. And so if that's true, stuff rolls downhill, then we need to make the top of the hill really strong and aligned in order for the organization to get where it wants to go.
Yeah, and I remember early in my career, I had gone through two big mergers, and I was on the executive team, so I was part of that. And I'll tell you, the one, it was two banks merging, and we were the ones buying the other bank. They were merging into us. The level of communication was exemplary. So everybody knew, my people knew we were constantly communicating, even if we didn't have anything specific or any changes or updates. There would almost be like a weekly, nothing new this week, no new information. We're going to continue with the premise of, previous emails or whatever. If there was a change, we communicated. And then it was funny because a couple of years later, we merged again and we were being bought. And what a different experience, because now our executive team, right, we were rolling up into this other organization, and the communication was almost cloak and daggerish, if you will, where you felt like I know stuff is going on, but we were the executive team. We didn't even know what was going on. So now you have people, and now we have people jumping ship, some of the good people jumping ship. And I have to be honest, I didn't blame them. If I'm good, I'm not going to do a crapshoot to see what it ends up being, because no one's telling me anything. I'm going to take control and I'm going to leave. So we ended up losing a lot of really, really good people, and being part of, just within a couple of years span, both the good, right, this great experience. And by the way, it wasn't because of me. It was because of the people above me. They were just wonderful and saying, we don't have anything new, but let your people, we're working on this, we're working on that. So we kept everybody in the loop, versus that cloak and dagger where you're like, are they going to stab me in the back? Didn't know what was going on. So
Right.
this is real. I mean, this is real.
And you started off talking about communication being one of the key elements of navigating change well. And it's funny because I write a weekly LinkedIn newsletter, and the topic this week was, in fact, around how to move your organization through change with a little bit more ease. And it recommended you start with your communication strategy. The title was Where to Begin Making Change Easier for Your Organization. And it recommends the communication strategy because there's so many layers. That's another one of those things where it's complex, but we just make it complicated. And there's so many like theories and methodologies and opinions out there around what a good change, what an effective change strategy looks, or communication strategy looks like. But you can kind of keep it simple if you just focus on the concept of how am I going to remove barriers for people to make this change easier. And one of the first places you can remove barriers is the barrier of communication. And, you know, communication is about the verbal transparency to a certain level, right? Or how consistent or frequent are you giving updates, things like that. But it's also the physical act of communicating, right? So if a leader is going to promise something, they're going to verbally communicate, this is how I'm going to show up and support you. Them following through on their promises is an actionable physical communication of, I've got your back and I value you being here. So I just, you know, there's definitely those two forms of communication that should really be established in a strategy and with flexibility, you know, upfront when you're really going to be going through a change, especially something as big as a merger or acquisition.
Yeah, that absolutely, because there's so many people affected and there's so many moving parts. So we have to
Yeah.
try to make the complicated less complicated, you know, to the best of our ability. What are you just gave a couple of strategies, right? The communication piece, but what are other ways that you go in and tailor? Because I know you really, it's not like this is my system and everybody's got to do it. You really go in and you customize and tailor whatever those strategies are that are the unique to the goals of the organization. So how do you kind of zero in on that tailoring or customization piece?
Yeah. Really, it should start with asking questions, because if we go in and we look at the picture and we start making plans or strategies around navigating change, then we're making a ton of assumptions. So my real role in the beginning is to go into an organization and move through a bit of a discovery process where I'm asking them some questions around where are they in the process of going through the changes that they're making to move toward their goals and initiatives. What seems to be getting in the way from their perspective, if they can zero in on specific things. The next step from zeroing in on the problems they're seeing is then asking enough questions to figure out the cause of that problem. Because if we just solve for the problem, we may not actually be doing a solution that sticks, is what I talked about, is if we can solve for the cause of the problem, that's the solution that sticks. So that's the second step there. And then if we have already seen or start to see some resistance or confusion or worry or some of the human elements of moving through change, then we need to start asking questions around like, why haven't these people adopted the change yet? You know, what do they see as getting in the way? And so again, asking questions so that we can then either provide a level of support we didn't know they needed, or help them understand something we thought they did but clearly don't. And so to really make things custom and unique, you have to be inquisitive. Curious leadership is really a foundation for any leadership team, because to bring it back to communication, there's two main forms. There's advocating and inquiring. And a lot of times we see people advocate, right? This is what I think. I want to make sure you understand my idea, and I want to make sure my point gets across, and I want you to validate that you get it. We don't spend enough time in the inquiry side and asking enough questions. And so, of course, you should make sure your point comes across. You want to have both, but we need to do more of the inquiry and not just advocacy. And that's what we see a lot of. So that's really kind of some of the places I start coming into an organization.
And that's the only way to customize, you know, and it's funny. And that's why I think you and I get along so well from the first time we met, because strategically, philosophically, I think even though we do different things, right, as business owners, philosophically, we approach the client from that same curiosity, and not my way is the right way. We got to figure out a plan for you, right? That customization piece. So it makes me crazy because everybody, I see this all the time on the sales side. They come in and my clients say this to me, oh, we met with this other vendor, right? Whoever. And they were like, oh, no, you have to do our process. And I shake my head thinking, why? Yes, I have a process, right? You've been through it, Amanda, my 7-step process. I have a process, but the sub skills under that process, every client is different. Who am I to say the way I say it's the way you should say it? My questions are the best questions. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard, because no one should be talking like me, just like I can't talk like you, because we come from a different vantage point, a different experience, but it has to be yours. So through that inquiry, that curiosity, and through the Q&A, right? The questioning skills. When we ask questions, it's like having a magic wand that all of a sudden we create clarity where there was mud, right? We're looking at muddy water. We ask really good questions. All of a sudden the muddy water is clean, because it's like, oh, now I get what you did, what you didn't do, what worked, what didn't, and why. And now we can really go in and move the needle and provide even more clarity. But we forget, we think, we assume, we judge, we say my way is the right way, instead of going in from this very curious management perspective. I love that. I love that word curious, because I think curiosity breeds innovation, right?
Yeah. Well, and with the muddy waters that you're talking about, that all comes from just the narrowed perspective that we have. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? We all have our life experiences, our own thoughts and opinions, and it's all just based on, you know, what we've gone through and where we are now, and that creates our perspective. And being able to ask enough questions of each other as a leadership team, or having a third party who's a little more objective come in where I can ask other questions, that's what helps us shift perspective and understand, like, oh, I see what you're saying, why you're saying it, just like you described here. And so it's really all about opening more doors and looking at things in a slightly different way, so that we can get down to like the right thing for that right moment, at least.
Yeah. And you know what's funny, Amanda? This is what I say, because it's a visual, right? I'm very visual in how I describe things. And a lot of times what they're doing is really good. It's just needs refinement. So when I come into my clients, I'm like, you know, you're 80% there. It's always that little 20% that needs the tweaking. So I tease and I go, we're in the right church. Now let's find your pew, right? Let's find exactly where you belong. And that's that clarity piece, right? That now we know clearly what that next step is, and whatever the changes that's happening. Do you see, working with your clients, especially the corporate, you know, the organizational ones, what are a lot of common challenges that you see that are facing when they have whatever the major change is that's happening?
Yeah. Typically, people are, I mean, you hit the nail on the head earlier when you described your personal experience. It's around confusion and frustration.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I'll give an example that an organization I'm working with now is currently experiencing, that I'm helping them move through, is they're completely restructuring one of their service areas. They're a service-based business. They have people coming into their organization all the time, and they're completely restructuring a whole section of it, which is going to affect multiple departments, as well as some other service areas. And so we're already getting feedback around people feeling like there's secrets being kept, that they're not going to have a say in how things end up. And what's interesting is that we're in planning mode. Like, they're still working on the strategy around how they're going to shape the services, what they're going to look like in the end, the first, second, and third steps. And so they're still in planning mode. Nothing's been executed yet. And people are already confused, worried, frustrated. And so that just points out, like, this stuff needs to happen proactively, right? The things around helping with communication strategies and navigating change and creating plans for that has to happen early in the process, because people are smart. They see things happening, and people gossip. And then gossip is the game of telephone, where it actually is going to be A, but people suddenly think it's going to be G, and G gets spread around like wildfire. And now you've got this thing happening, right? Which you can proactively prevent. And so what we're addressing is helping to create a little bit more of the verbal communication clarity around what they can expect, timelines, what we are going to expect of people, what people can expect of leadership, what they can expect from a cadence of communication and updates. We've created a platform on their internal intranet so that people can just get updates on a weekly basis around certain things, on a monthly basis around everything else. So they can go there as a resource. It's also a place where they can provide any feedback, ideas, concerns, and things like that. And they can either do it anonymously or with their name, and they can choose whether or not they want someone to follow up. So if they have a concern and they want someone to talk to about it, of course they have to give the name in that case. Otherwise, you don't know who to talk to. But just creating a lot of those opportunities is what's going to allow either individuals or groups of people to gain more clarity and reduce their worry and frustration. So I would say that's that in a nutshell. This experience that's currently actively happening would be the main thing that we see. And what that results in is exhaustion, change exhaustion. It creates exhaustion around decision making. It creates people wanting to exit because they're like, I can't do this anymore. There's only a certain amount of time they can tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty. And so, yeah, that's kind of where the nutshell that I see for every organization I work with.
And it's interesting because we create, our employees resist the change and we think, oh yeah, they're trouble. They're not buying in, right? They're adversarial with me. And the reality is if we just were clearer or we had a better roadmap to keep people in the loop. I love that when you go in, you build an infrastructure literally for that specific, whatever that change is. In that one case, right, they're changing that the whole leadership structure and how they're offering the service based, with the client. This is big, right? These are big events. So how do we mitigate the resistance and get buy-in quicker? That's the way. So infrastructure. And here's the other thing, Amanda, we have the technology now that it's very easy to build these things into our intranet, right? That those personal websites within the organization. There's no excuse anymore to say it's hard to communicate. Back in my day, and this, remember when that first merger I was talking about, we didn't have emails. So it was constant memos being sent and getting on the telephone, physically going to each office location and having FaceTime with people. It was a lot of effort, let me tell you, but it was so worth it because in the back end, we saved time, we saved money. It's smooth. We didn't lose a lot of our great people because they knew where their place was going to be, even if they didn't know exactly, right? So we can mitigate that resistance by showing up, using the strategies and infrastructural pieces of the puzzle, if you will, the way you're describing it. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I would say there's one other half to attend to because you definitely, that communication piece, opening up opportunities to deliver and receive communication is really important. When it comes to the resistance piece that you mentioned, and I'll briefly talk about this because we could spend a whole hour just on this part because I'm a nerd. But the other part of that is if we're only informing and just focusing on making sure they understand, we're pushing them to change. And they're only going to resist pushing, right? And so information can reduce their confusions and worries and frustrations and things like that. But in order to adopt a change, for some people, information is enough. They can see clearly why the change is happening. It resonates with their own internal motivation, and they can jump in. Some people have a harder time and resist it more, and what we need to focus on there is removing a barrier. So one just super relatable example would be, think about someone who their ultimate goal is to eat healthier and lose weight. But naturally, humans are always going to lean back into what's a little more familiar or comfortable or convenient.
Sure.
And so even though that person has that goal, they've had a long day at work and it is more comfortable and convenient to go through a drive-through on their way home, right? To get that for dinner. Where if what the barrier for that person might be the effort it takes to make a meal, and there's a misalignment around trying to eat healthier and the effort it takes to make a meal. So what if that person subscribed to one of those like meal kit boxes or those pre-made meal services that can show up at your door, right? So if we remove the barrier and make it easier to eat healthy, then that person is more likely to adopt the habit of eating healthy. So that's, from an organizational perspective, that's part of the leadership's job, is to figure out what barrier is in the way of that person adopting the new habit, and then remove that barrier so that it's not easier and convenient and more comfortable to do it the old way. It's just as easy, convenient, and comfortable to do it the new way too. So that's the other half of adoption.
Yeah. Yeah.
Resistance.
It literally, it paves the way for easy peasy. So people are like, yeah, I could do it that way. It becomes a no big deal. Again,
Yeah.
if we're clear on what is the barrier, and this is an easy way to eliminate that. Hopefully it's an easy way to eliminate the barrier. Sometimes maybe not so easy, but at least if I understand the barrier and how to break it down, you're going to get better buy-in quicker. What's some of, go ahead. Were you going to say something else? Okay. What advice do you have for leaders that are really looking to create that culture where there's continuous improvement? So no matter what comes down the pike, we're adapting, we're kind of moving and shaking with it with little resistance because we've set that culture in place.
Yeah. That definitely takes time, and what it requires is a growth mindset. And so honestly, again, it doesn't have to be complicated. I would lean back into curiosity. If we're talking again also about the leadership first approach, is if leadership can first demonstrate curiosity as a valued attribute, it over time will become a cultural thing for people to adopt as well. They'll become more curious, they'll ask more questions, and that makes people more responsive instead of reactive.
Yeah.
And that turns into a growth mindset. That turns into resiliency, because our reactions come from emotions, and there are so many emotions that come along with change, right? Or people asking us to do new things and different things. And, so we react with our emotions, but we respond with information. So the only way to get more information is to ask questions, or to be curious and open to receiving enough information. So I would just lean back into that. Just keep it, again, yes, it's complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. So go back to the curiosity, make it a set attribute in your leadership, demonstrate that throughout the organization, through all the different layers of leadership and management, and make that the culture. That turns into growth mindset, ongoing learning, more resilience and adaptability, and a little bit more of an easy time adopting change.
Yeah, lead by example, right? If we could lead by example and we support it over and over and over and over again, people start doing it and they're not even realizing it. I like your approach, Amanda, because you take something that's truly complex. I mean, there's so many moving parts with any change, right? Especially within an organizational structure. And you take that complicated and you kind of simplify it, right? Which I think is really important, because when we don't know where to begin, we don't do anything. And that could be, so it's just like, oh, it'll work out on its own. Well, no, we have to get in, and we do have to help navigate that change. Last question, we're out of time, but what advice do you have for organizations that maybe are a little hesitant to invest in leadership development, change management, especially when, look what's happening in our economy when we're facing these budget constraints or the short-term pressures? Because, we're worrying about the short, but what is that long-term impact too?
Yeah. Well, you kind of spoke to half of that there. Is I would recommend they consider the long-term impact of staying where they are. So what are they tolerating? What have they been tolerating? And what would not change or be different in a better way if they stayed the same? So really looking at that longer-term picture is what I would invite them to think about, as well as I mentioned earlier, not just identifying the problems, but the causes of problems. And sometimes that requires a third party, someone who's objective, but has the best interests of the organization in mind. Sometimes it requires that. So when it comes to thinking about the cause of problems, one, if you're struggling as a leadership team to really look at it that way, you're too close to the problem, you can't read the label from inside the jar, and you're having trouble identifying causes, consider the benefits that you would get from working with someone else. But if you are able to collectively identify the causes, are one of those causes, does that determine the need? If not, then maybe it's not the right time, right? But if one of the causes of the problems you're seeing does determine the need, then it does outweigh the upfront investment for that long-term return and those solutions that stick.
Here's the thing. What if the organizational leader is the problem?
Yeah. Well, investing in change, change management, leadership development, whatever it is, it's not a cost, it's an advantage. I mean, it sets you and the rest of the organization up for success.
Absolutely. And that's the bottom line, right? We're in a shrinking economy. I'm in, but all my clients are in budget. So, right. They say to me, Con, what's the price? Here's the number of days, give us a number. And they go and right, they put it in for the budget. It gets approved. It doesn't get approved, whatever. Right. But we're in the budget. We're in the budget talks. And it was funny because all of them now they're saying, well, they're telling us to cut budgets. So what's the priority? And my response is always business development. Are your people developing new business? Great that we have a culture of the client journey once they're inside. Who's bringing in the new blood? And while we're making sure that nobody's walking out the back door, right? So you can't just worry about one dimension of this. And they go, oh yeah, they're willing to spend the money because of the idea that we could bring new dollars in. But it's the same thing with leadership. If I'm the problem and I'm not supporting and I'm not coaching and I'm not helping my employees grow, right? In this case, business development, you're the manager, you're not helping me develop those skills, right? You're not leading me. Nothing's going to change. I could be out pounding the pavement. If I suck, I suck. I'm not bringing in new dollars.
Yeah.
So, right, it all works together. So we can't be stint. I'm not saying throw money away. To me, that's ridiculous, right? Budgets are real, but we have to constantly prioritize those budgets every year, even in a shrinking economy, to give us the biggest bang for our buck on the back end. We have to grow. We have to change. We have to develop, whether the economy is shrinking or not. So it's tough. Can I tell you, being an organizational leader, especially bigger organizations, it's tough when the economy is shrinking and we're facing inflation and all you're hearing from, your board of directors or shareholders, cut costs, cut costs, cut costs. Training leaders should not be one of the things you cut, right? We should be watching other budgetary constraints.
And it can cause a lot of money. It can be very costly to not make the adjustments necessary, right? Like to your example, your personal experience earlier, again, you had a lot of people who left that organization. The cost of attrition is, like, monetarily, is very high. It is very costly to have people leave and then rehire. And so if you could do something up front to do some retention, that alone is saving you money. And so it feels like you're spending money somewhere else, but the amount of money you're saving in multiple other places, like that, the scales balance, are unbalanced, but in the positive, right? Like, invest in some leadership development and change navigation, and you're going to save a ton of money in multiple other places.
Absolutely. And the long-term results, the trajectory goes exponentially on the upward, kind of angle, right? If you're graphing it out. It was funny during COVID where, I had no income coming in. I had to pivot, started working with small businesses where I never even thought to do that before. And I hired a business coach and I spent a lot of money. When I look back, though, on what I spent, first of all, what I learned was wonderful, right? What he reinforced that I already knew. I just had to tweak what I was doing was very valuable. But I would go to him and say, hey, I heard about this software, or this idea, or this program, and you don't need it, Connie. You're already doing that, Connie. So he saved me more. I would have spent that money had I not had him. So again, it goes back to what you're saying. Yes, I spent a lot of money up front, but I would have spent a heck of a lot more money had I not hired him. So he was very cost effective when you look at the trajectory of what other money I was going to spend, not knowing, thinking, well, I think I need that. I think I need that, because I didn't know I had all these blind spots. So sometimes having that navigation, that leadership navigation, like we're talking about today with you, it really does save so much on the other pieces of the puzzle as we move forward, that it actually becomes a cost savings on the budget. It's so, but see, it's counterintuitive when that is so counter. People are like, wait, you spent $10,000, but I saved $20,000. So that $10,000 investment and by the way, of myself, right? So what you're talking about, when we invest that and we change behavior and we create these growth mindset people, the long-term implication of anytime change comes, people start going with the flow. We get that return on the investment over and over and over again without spending another dollar. So again, it's that penny wise, dollar foolish mentality. Yeah, it's counterintuitive, Amanda. I totally get that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy. So everybody, you need more minutes in your life. So here's the deal. I'm going to put in the show notes her website, which is businessaccelerated.com. And again, it's with an EX instead of an AC. You're driving saying, what is Connie talking about? Don't worry about it. The link is in the show notes. When you look, you'll see what I'm saying. So it's businessaccelerated.com. If you have a question for Amanda directly, she does check her emails. It's Amanda@businessaccelerated.com. Again, that will be in the show notes. And you do have a free offer or resource for everybody, really for the long term.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I have a weekly newsletter on LinkedIn, and there are a ton of there's a ton of information in each of those, really touch on a lot of topics regarding organizational goals, change navigation, leadership development. So I invite you to come to subscribe to that. It's an elephant in your boardroom. But the thing that I'm doing with some consistency that I would like to invite people to be interested in is these roundtable discussions. And just like you and I have had a beneficial conversation here, it's an opportunity for me to invite certain leaders and experts in their fields to come in and show up with their own best practices, their own advice and recommendations to help each other navigate through these difficulties. Right now you mentioned we're moving through a tough economy. It's hard to make decisions around where to spend money. We're getting to the end of the year here. There's a lot of layoffs and restructuring internally happening. And that's all change, and that's all leadership. And so what I do is we have, people come into these roundtables and we discuss specific topics like that, and we can all share. I can facilitate, offer my expertise, and other people can offer their insights and best practices as well. So that's something that I'm doing on a consistent basis. I'll provide you the form that people can fill out for this upcoming one. But if they fill it out and they can't come to the closest one, there's always another one coming up. So if they have interest, I can always make sure that they get invited to the next one. So I'll give you that information to have in the show notes so that people can either come soon or come to the next one or later.
It gets them on the list so that they can see in their schedule whether it works or not. Let's say 6 months from now, they know they're going to go through a major change within their organization. They can maybe start coming to them to start to get to ideas and strategize so they can bring that back to their organization as well. And it's a free resource, which is wonderful, Amanda. And I like the idea of bringing multiple kind of brains together, because every organization is a little different, and yet we're kind of the same at the same time. So how can we use best practices from each other and learn? So if I've been through it, I could tell you, oh, we did that. That didn't work. Try this. This worked better. So now we really can talk at a much higher level, specific about whatever's going on within the organization at that time. So it becomes very timely, which I love. I think that's great. Also connect with Amanda on LinkedIn. Her newsletter is wonderful to read. Again, another free resource. And you're very good at consistently getting those newsletters out, that sharing that valuable information. You're very regular. I see it on LinkedIn all the time. So that's great. Another resource. See, again, that's why I love doing the show, Amanda, because between you and I and the resources and the free things that we put out there, people really can change. And then when you get to those more complicated, at least you have some of the foundation done, and then you bring in experts like, you and I to take it to that next level. We could do a lot of legwork before you have to spend the money to bring experts in like you and myself. So I just like it. It helps build the know, like, trust factor as well. So people can get the vibe of whether we're a good fit for them, their organization, whatever it is. So connect with Amanda. She's brilliant. And again, offers a lot on the back end from a resource perspective. Kiddo, thank you for being on. As always, just great conversation. We are all in the throes of change with the economy, right? It's an election year next year. What does that mean to you? How are you going to navigate it? And really be honest with yourself. Do you need help? We can't do it alone. There's just too many moving parts to everything these days. So sometimes bringing that expert in, like my example before with my business coach, we save time and money so that we can really get that ROI much faster. So check out Amanda. Of course, check out me. We're both here to help you in any way we can. Amanda, again, thanks so much for being on. Always a joy hanging out with you.
Same here, Connie. Thanks.
Oh, always a pleasure. And I hope you will join me weekly as we question, build, and discover no matter where you are on navigating your change or change that's thrust upon you. I hope my guests and I provide some ideas for you to percolate on. But here's the thing, information's a beautiful thing. Listening to the show, listening to Amanda's ideas. Oh, that's really smart. And then doing nothing with it. That's not smart. So take an idea, take a tip, try it, execute, put it into action. I promise you magic happens on the back end. And you will see the change just from a little bit smoother perspective. That's my guess and I hope for you. So take the information, do something with it. Magic happens, baby. Trust me on that one. You've been listening to Enlightenment of Change with me, your host, Connie Whitman, on webtalkradio.com. I truly am honored to have you on your journey of change with me and my guests. And I hope you come back every week and learn something, two things every week to apply to your life. My job is to make your life easier. And I truly am honored to have you on this journey with me. I love you all. Have a great week and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.